talking once about policies.
Yeah,
If it's an enhancement,
yeah.
if it's required, then they give you the first.
But if they're losing them, like they should have to replace them. But like if it's the internal, like actual wires, like shouldn't be like.
Well, if we know there's internal, we can actually bring to Apple and say, some of your wiring's not working.
It hasn't. It hasn't happened. Like my friend, I know like his like nothing. You can see nothing, no damage on the inside, but it doesn't work.
That's a different
And
case.
the learning comments turned him around and said,
They don't have the direction now. So send me an email. And I'll just forward to the person. This is a little bit more unique. Just lost.
yeah. If it's like if you damage it yourself, then you're stupid.
But if it's malfunctioning, it's not
Yeah,
working.
that's a different
That
story.
we should go back to the vendor and say, can you replace this?
I've had like 10 people come up to me asking me. They're like, are you gonna go talk to Mr. Figueredo? And I was like,
Mention
I
that,
will.
we'll have to mention that for next week's deployment, but we need to do is then get them. Second thing, you go to a store, return it, what do? You
Yeah.
have to return the original
Yeah,
and say it's not
exactly.
working, try it, and they'll say, okay. So I'll bring up with Apple and swap, like, how do we get it? I'm talking about the broken ones that people damage, I'm talking about the ones that are,
But like the ones that are actually
the
broken.
ones, like, we still have them, they're just not working.
Yeah.
Send me an email, will you?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Peter, do you want gum? Okay, so you can go first. Yeah. So this is my mom. Hi, mom. This is your cheering crowd here.
do that first.
Such a big school. That makes me really happy. I really appreciate it. So it's like,
I'm so glad that we're doing this together.
I know. Yeah,
Is it the same one? Like for all of these
maybe it's like during the building.
I was not like totally good, so.
No, okay. Whatever. Are they saying a few words? No, they're not.
I'm sorry?
They're not saying a few words.
No. Okay. They do their swearing in piece. There are a few words go when they get, because they've got a, you guys have already done your press release, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it'll just be a few seconds.
Well, actually, wait. Robert Parker's question.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I gave him
Yeah,
his
you
questions.
answered all
Okay,
those?
yeah,
Yep.
perfect. Mine were really short. The one where it was tell me a little bit about yourself.
That was the
It was
shortest
like 4 sentences because I didn't know what to say.
Just play, you say like you play soccer. Like,
I like politics. I play soccer.
Okay, that's good.
I'm in French immersion and I basically that's what. What about you?
Kaboom!
That was the hardest question.
Heather, can you just sit down here?
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our board meeting for Monday, May 9th. At this time, I please ask that you stand for the singing of our national anthem. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to trustees, staff, members of our public and community that are joining us today, members of local media, those watching at home as well. This is our board meeting once again for May 9th, and this is a rather special meeting, and we only see this once a year. Item number 3, which is our swearing in of student trustees for 2016-17. So before we jump into that, if I could turn the mic over to our current student trustee, Hannah Tobias Murray.
Thank you, Chair White. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to be introducing our incoming student trustees today. So both girls went through an extensive process of the student trustee elections. There were 11 eligible applicants who went through a process of applying through written application, and then interviews that were done with Trustee Officer Heather Miller, as well as Trustee Penny Deeth and Superintendent Jeff Gillies, as well as myself. And then 4 candidates were sent on to the Student Senate election, where Tory Dockree and Elizabeth Wong were selected to be our incoming student trustees for the 2016-2017 school year. Both girls are going into grade 12 next year. They are incredibly excited for this opportunity and to be working with the Board of Trustees as well as HWDSB staff. They have a passion, they both have a passion for mental health and well-being and ensuring that the student voice is well represented in the school board. A little bit of information about both girls. So first, Tori is from West Hill Secondary School, and as I said, she's going into grade 12 in the fall. She is an IB student as well as a French immersion student. Some of Tori's interests include playing soccer. She has acted in the Sears Drama Festival. She's on the senior reach for the top team, as well as she coaches the junior reach for the top team, and she has participated in Model UN conferences, as well as she has a part-time job at Old Navy. For Elizabeth, Elizabeth is going into grade 12 at Henderson. She is on student council. I believe she has been their vice president. She has been on student senate for the past 2 years. She's on the eco team. She's a peer mentor. She's been part of Meet a Wee. She plays volleyball, badminton, water polo, and she has a part-time job at McDonald's. So both girls are incredibly well-rounded and involved young individuals, and I'm so excited to introduce you to them. This opportunity is not one that many students in our board have the opportunity to receive, and I'm so excited that it's going to 2 young individuals who are going to do such a fantastic job with it and really seize the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Heather.
Great. So tonight I'd like to welcome Tori and Elizabeth to the front, and we'll do Tori first. You'll come up. We'll do your swearing in. Just read that. Okay.
I, Tory Dockree, having been selected by my peers to represent the elementary and secondary students of Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, do solemnly swear that I will respect the rules of protocol and conduct of this board, will represent students to the best of my ability, will present the best interests of students for the benefit of the board, and will serve as an advocate and representative of the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board at all times.
I, Elizabeth Wong, having been selected by my peers to represent the elementary and secondary students of Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, do solemnly swear that I will respect the rules of protocol and conduct of this board, will represent students to the best of my ability, will present the best interest of students for the benefit of the board, and will serve as an advocate and representative of the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board at all times.
That concludes the swearing-in ceremony.
Thank you very much. We were waiting for you to say that at the end, Heather. I was expecting to kind of, with the power vested in me, I now, one of those, but not tonight. But anyways, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I want to thank and welcome Tori and Elizabeth to the boardroom, even though I guess this is I actually turned to the vice chair halfway through the introductions and I said, I really hope they're sitting behind that podium because otherwise they're not here tonight. But anyways, I can see both of you slightly. But welcome to the boardroom, and I know you've been watching plenty of webcasts, so that's your initiation from here on out. You can, you'll be participating before you know it, and you have a great mentor in student trustee Tobias Murray. So on behalf of the entire board, I can say we're all very excited to work with you. And come September, you'll be the two strongest trustees in the boardroom. There you go. So you have high expectations already. So once again, on behalf of the board, thank you very much. Oh, of course. Mr. Director, would you like to take us away on that?
I know I met both of you, all of you, but I won't recall your names, but I know there's family support here for both. Tory, who has her mother, her uncle, and siblings, and nephews too, or yes? And also Elizabeth, who has her mother and aunt, is that correct, here with you? So we'd like to thank you for your support and your ongoing support through next year as well, as your support is instrumental in supporting the great work they're going to bring forward. So I want to thank the parents and family who are here tonight, and staff who are also here from both schools who are supporting both of these young ladies in this opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you for that reminder, Mr. Director, and I believe refreshments are in your office after this? Yes? Maybe? No? That's a joke. Don't go to the director's office. But with that, thank you very much. It's always great to see you in the boardroom. And for some reason, it's always when we get sworn in, our family members are here, and then they'll never come back to the boardroom again. But you can watch online, which my wife still refuses to do. Anyways, thank you for joining us. It's much appreciated, and I'm sure our student trustees very much appreciate it as well, so thank you. Item number 4 is approval of the agenda. So looking to trustees for agenda review. Someone like to move the motion to approve the agenda? Trustee Van Geffen, do we have a seconder? Trustee Danko, thank you. Any questions or comments on tonight's agenda? Trustee Pattison. Not a problem, not a problem. So any questions to the approval of the agenda? All those in favor? That is unanimous, and I should mention that we have regrets from Trustee Archer. Otherwise, everyone else is in attendance. Item number 5, declarations of conflict of interest. Any declarations for any items on tonight's agenda? Number 6, confirmation of the minutes. Any comments on the April 18th or April 25th minutes in the package? Trustee Pattison.
Thank you. I was getting a little eager to address this one. So I just wanted to look at the April 25th, number 11, written notice of motion. I'm just wondering if we had a date yet when that will appear at Finance Facilities.
Yes, thank you for that. So just to remind trustees, that was a motion to refer to Finance and Facilities Committee. I'll briefly ask the Finance and Facilities Committee Chair, Trustee Van Geffen.
In short, the answer is no, but in conversation with Superintendent Zucker, that is on the tracking, and given there's a lot on the plate right now with budget discussions and such, but that's not to say that it's not a priority, but that I don't have an answer yet when we will see it at Finance and Facilities.
So might I suggest that after the meeting, Trustee Pattison follow up with the Chair of the Committee and Executive Superintendent to see when that would best be placed at a Finance and Facilities Committee?
Great, thank you.
Yes, great. And actually, we just received some information just at the end of last week on community hubs as well, so perhaps that is timely. So much appreciated. Any further comments on April 18th or 25th minutes? Seeing none, we don't need a motion. Item number 7 is correspondence. Attached, you'll find a letter from Blue Water District School Board on the OFSAA transfer policy. How would trustees like to receive or act on this correspondence? Trustee Hicks.
I would support this letter from the Blue Water District School Board. I really believe it's time that OFSAA look at the transfer rule, especially when boards now have schools that would accept the students out of catchment because of the closure of schools and opening of new schools. And in the motion, I certainly like the people that are included in the review of student athletes, parents, coaches, school board trustees, and school board officials for input and further on it. OFSAA has been governing sport in Ontario for many, many, many years, and as the letter stated, I'm not sure whether it was 4 or 5 years ago when they changed it, might even be longer than that, because they were afraid of schools stacking teams because of the transfer rule. So it's time that they revisited this and made sure that they took into consideration especially rural schools as stated in this letter. So I would support this, that we support this letter and send whatever we have to do to send it on.
Okay, so is that a motion that we write our own letter or that we respond to Blue Water in support of the recommendation for a review?
I would do both if possible. I would, that we're supporting that, but also send a letter from this board that we believe a review should be done. The more letters, the better.
So if I hear that correctly, then this is a motion to draft our own letter to the Executive Director of OFSAA, as well as copy Blue Water District School Board in support of the recommendation to review. That's moved by Trustee Hicks, seconded by Trustee Johnstone. Thank you. Any comments or questions on the motion on the floor? Anything further, Trustee Hicks? Trustee Johnstone? No? Any comments? Trustee Deeth?
I would also support it, and also to keep in mind that with schisms, as we have now, which probably weren't around when this rule was in place, and that it does impact students looking at potentially going to a schism, because then they have to consider whether they give up their sport or not. So, for support of that as well. So,
Thank you very much. Trustee Deeth, further questions or comments? See none. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, and thank you, Trustee Hicks. Item number 8, our Finance and Facilities Committee reports from April. So the first one is 8.1, the report from April 20th, and 8.2, the report from April 28th. We do have a revision for 8.1, which will be discussed first, so please see the revised report that's being passed around, and then I will turn it over to Trustee Van Geffen to bring the first report. Trustee Van Geffen.
Thank you. So with that being said, I will present the report from April the 20th. Trustees will see. I'll move 2 reports. These, as many of these reports. I'll move the first report and then the second report. Trustees will note that there are items to which flow between both, but with that, I'll move the first one. So the action item that trustees will see. Trustees will recall that in a previous board meeting, we had passed requesting additional information as we work on the secondary benchmark part of the multi-year capital strategy, where we voted in favor of science labs, and learning commons and playing fields, but requested more information on gym floors and technology labs. Trustees will see, as that information was brought forward, motion that came from that HWDSB focus priorities for all secondary facility benchmark strategy on science labs, playing fields, learning commons, and gym floors. And second part to the motion, that the capital needs related to technology labs be funded by the secondary program strategy component or the annual school renewal component of the multi-year capital strategy. Good discussion that came from that motion. Trustees will note that you do not see within your package a report attached to this motion. The report was additionally received as information. Trustees will have this within their packages that they would have received via email. Yes, so I will leave it at that with regards to the motion. We also received an interim financial report. Note that this financial report goes up to January 31st, 2016. The next financial report that we will see for the 2015-16 year will be based on March the 31st numbers. The conclusion in this report is that the projected $2 million surplus is holding. Finally, additional information for discussion as we continue through the budget development. There was discussion on the temporary assistance piece. Now, trustees looking forward at the next meeting on April the 28th. We'll get further into the temporary assistance piece and a motion that came forward from that. So this, I will move this report.
Thank you very much, Trustee Van Geffen. Trustee Van Geffen is moving the revised 8.1. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Beatty, thank you. Questions or comments to the action item or the two monitoring items of 8-1? Trustee Pattison.
Thank you, Chair White. I just wanted to ask a quick question on what changed. Obviously, the motion looks like it's different, so maybe you can just explain the difference. You actually mentioned the secondary facility benchmark on an A on the first, on the new one, and the old one you didn't.
Thank you. Trustee Van Geffen.
So the addition, trustees will note, the addition has to do, the technology labs in the presentation that came forward from staff, the first motion that came forward, that technology labs will be addressed within the program strategy. What we see in the second part and what was part of that report delivered to trustees is the annual school renewal component of the multi-year capital strategy. Trustees will remember, I believe that was a $3 to $3.5 million component of that annual $35 million multi-capital year strategy. But the information that was presented to the committee was that the maintenance of the technology labs is addressed through the annual school renewal. And that the specialized high skills programs, as well as, and I'll have to be corrected on this, if there are tier 3 program strategies that take place within technology labs, that they will be addressed through the component of the multi-year capital strategy that falls under the secondary program strategy. And as a reminder, from the secondary end, this multi-year capital strategy, where the secondary school benchmarks is a component of that, $11 million. The secondary program strategy is an annual $2 million commitment. So over the next 10 years, technology labs and where they fall into secondary program strategy, that is an annual 2-year, that is a annual $2 million, but $10 million over the 5-year capital strategy.
Thank you. Was that enough answer, Trustee Pattison?
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Further questions or comments to the report? I had next Trustee Tobias Murray.
Through the chair, first, I'm just looking for clarification on what we mean by technology labs. Are they like iPad carts or computer labs? Yeah.
I'll go to the Executive Superintendent, Superintendent Zucker.
So through the chair, when we talk about technology labs, we talk about all of the the shops and those types of things that we have in our schools. So they can be different from school to school. So what we would say is that when there is a tier 3 program or a SHISM in a school that is specific to the school, that's when we would pay for it out of the secondary program strategy funding. And any other sort of school that's part of the regular auto shop, cosmetology, construction, those would be taken care of through the annual school renewal. So just to take Greg off the hook, when we sent Heather the reports, she got the original one, the revised one, and cleared up the motion a little bit, so that's why you received a new motion. Otherwise, thank you.
That was a lot quicker answer. Hannah, further question?
Thank you. Okay, that clears things up for me a lot. I'm also just wondering kind of what the rationale was behind deciding on specifically prioritizing science labs, playing fields, learning commons, and gym floors.
So the rationale, okay, I'll go to the chair of the committee.
So if trustees will recall, over the last month and a half, there's been a lot of development. Initially, when the feasibility studies were being done on secondary schools in HWDSB, they were being done under the previous revitalization strategy. We'll see in the next report, you start to see some of the guiding principles of this benchmark and this multi-year capital strategy. But this has been an ongoing development, much of it captured within motions at the committee level, and to speak as chair of the committee as we went through the process of establishing these benchmarks, because I do believe this to be a very comprehensive strategy that we have in place, and that's speaking to the whole strategy. But even the secondary benchmarks, we're looking at priorities, but we've asked for the costs. We've asked that can they be completed within a certain period of time. So we've dwindled it down, but as we dwindle down, student needs were always at the top of the list as we look at science labs, learning commons, gym floors, playing fields. The committee felt, as we worked through this process, that we wanted benchmarks within our secondary schools that the kids were using, that the students were using most often, and that they would really get bang for their buck in terms of this multi-year strategy. But we wanted to be very responsible in developing this strategy, that we were going to make commitments that were budgeted for, and this being a 5-year plan, and we'll see in the chart in the next committee, in the next finance and facility meeting, that I think we're being very responsible with the dollars that we have to work with. So technology labs was difficult, because if it had come on to the secondary benchmarks, it probably would have come at the cost of, say, another benchmark, and that's where staff, with what they presented through the program strategy, that much of the technology needs would be addressed through the program strategy, through the annual school renewal dollars, that trustees were content with pulling it off of the benchmark, but we'll see an area like that in other components of the strategy.
Thank you very much. Further questions or comments? So with that, the motion is moved and seconded. All those in favor? That is unanimous, including Trustee Van Geffen. Thank you. Item 8.2, the Finance and Facilities Committee report from April 28th. Trustee Van Geffen.
So this is going to be difficult, because if the chair thinks that I'm long-winded in what I've been saying, this was actually a pretty intense meeting, and trustees will see much that came from it. So as the report is delivered, should the trustees wish to separate, you see 3 action items up for discussion here. Should trustees wish to separate some of the action items, I leave that to the board. And I'll begin with saying that when we had this meeting, you'll see at the end of this report, you have a monitoring item. We actually asked that the monitoring item with regards to the Sir Winston Churchill playing field be brought forward initially at the beginning of the meeting, because it did provide some context to the first action item that we see here. So that report was brought forward. And what's interesting as that report was brought forward, and I thank Trustee Mulholland for being there and providing some ward context, historical context to that discussion. Something that came forward from that is we look at, and I'll go right in action item A, as we look at areas, trustees will see on the report, you'll see the appendix that has the chart, and you'll notice on the chart of the benchmarks and the costs allocated to those benchmarks, and the X-out items show the areas to which those benchmarks have been completed. Playing fields was one thing that when we receive funding for new builds, playing fields are not part of that funding. So part of the discussion on Winston Churchill was that we draft, wasn't captured in a motion, but that we draft a letter to the ministry in discussions that playing fields should be a part of funding. And that's on tracking and to be discussed further. But the action items that trustees see before them, the secondary facility benchmark strategy, that the motion that you see before you, the first part of that motion has to do with the chart. The second part has to do with the guiding principles that as staff develop the 5-year plan for our secondary benchmark strategy. The guiding principles will be what brings forward the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth year as we work through. So trustees will see this motion that the secondary facility benchmark strategy report be approved and that staff prepare a multi-year implementation plan to deliver the priorities related to the secondary facility benchmark strategy over a 5-year period, and that on an annual basis, staff bring back the specific plan related to the $11 million set aside annually for the strategy back to the board for approval as part of the capital budget. And the second part to that is that the guiding principles for the multi-year capital strategy be approved. Second part, action item B, budget discussion. So there were two motions that came forward from our budget discussion. Trustees will recall we are going through a budget right now, though yes, we are talking a lot about facilities, but we are also going through landing our budget right now. Trustees will recall that we landed our school-based staffing a number of meetings ago. Trustees will recall that we've talked about a reduction in temporary assistance of 1.5 million in the next budget year. A reduction, we've had discussion in reduction to our contingency. We also received an increase in our grants for student need, which as we get closer to, well, have now balanced the budget, and trustees will see that balanced budget come forward in the near future. Two motions came out of a discussion, the discussion on the budget development. The first motion from Trustee Danko, and with respect to Trustee Danko, as this motion was come forward, this was an area that Trustee Danko had brought forward, I believe, last fall, and the request, some things don't come back as soon as the request had not been fulfilled. So Trustee Danko brought forward the motion, and this then gets it to be tracked by staff, and we will see reporting on it. So the motion that staff bring back a report providing the cost to provide transportation to any Westmount secondary student that resides outside of the walking distance, and second part to the motion that the staff bring back a report providing the cost to provide HSR passes for any secondary student attending Westmount Secondary School that would be eligible for HSR passes to their home school. So as we work through the budget development on the transportation line, that's where the motion came forward. Second motion, as we were discussing, so the second motion that came forward during the discussion on the budget from Trustee White in regards to our temporary assistance and the $1.5 million reduction that we are talking about in the 2016-17 budget year. Trustees requested that, as this is a pretty big deal, the $1.5 million reduction in temporary assistance. We've year after year had increases within the temporary assistance. Staff is confident that they can reduce the temporary assistant budget line by $1.5 million. Trustees share that. At the committee level, we share that confidence, but we did ask for the plan in which staff was going to implement in order to get to that 1.5 million reduction. So with that, the following motion was passed that board approve a budget reduction of 1.5 million to the temporary assistance as year one of a 2-year plan to reduce the costs related to providing temporary assistance through a 6-prong approach provided by staff that includes A, creating a positive work environment, B, supporting staff through a total attendance support program, C, making improvements in human resources to provide better tracking, follow-up, communication, and training with regards to sick leave, D, supporting employees who have a pattern of absences, E, following up on potential abuse of sick leave when suspected, and F, ensuring that the board is following the collective agreements and terms and conditions with regards to providing replacement coverage, and that staff be required to bring back a quarterly monitoring report to Finance and Facility Committee. So with that, Mr. Chair, I move the report from April the 28th.
Thank you for that. And was there anything to add on the Churchill Plainfield monitoring item? You did that? Okay, sorry. I must have zoned out at the end there. We have a mover of the report. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Beatty, thank you very much. Looking to trustees, is there a desire to go one item at a time to ask questions, or would we like to ask questions on any items together? Any preference? Trustee Pattison, preference?
I would like to pull the motion for the 1.5 million, just to talk about that separately.
Okay, are there any other items that folks would like to discuss separately other than the 1.5? Yes, the temporary assistance piece of 1.5. Trustee Hicks? Yep, so would you like to split everything up? Okay, let's just do that then. Perfect, not a problem. So then let's do it this way. What I'll do is ask trustees at this point, are there any questions to the secondary facility benchmark strategy and the report attached? And that's the first motion that has an A and B. Are there any questions to that strategy? Trustee Hicks.
On Appendix B, just for clarification, the sport fields at 1.25 million, that's grass, and 2 million would be artificial. Just for clarification on the chart.
Thank you. I'll go to Chair of the Committee. That's correct. Perhaps that's worth noting in the footnote.
When I attended this meeting, I made some comments, and I just want to make sure that they're on the minutes. The 1.25 million for a grass field is very high, so it's better to be high than low. But to give you an example of the McNabb track being done and the field, it was under $1 million. On the gym floors, the 15,000, that's for a light strip and a lacquer on it, versus the 40, which would be a total stripped down and relined and then lacquered. Is that correct?
Go to the Executive Superintendent or Chair of the Committee? Executive Superintendent?
Yes, that's correct.
Correct?
So I'm assuming that the consultant, when he went through the floors in that he identified as an example Orchard Park, which we know is really bad, Sir Winston Churchill and Glendale. So these figures are based on the consultant's report after looking at those floors. Is that correct?
Through to the Executive Superintendent?
Through the chair, it was staff that went through and did an audit of the gym floors all across the secondary schools. And yes, this is based on their audit.
Thank you. Trustee Hicks.
And your final figure on Nora Francis, 2 million, we know that's going to be artificial, but the new North School at 1 million, is that 1 million in partnership with the city with the old glass? So how did we determine that our share was 1 million of that new field?
Thank you. Executive Superintendent?
Through the chair, that's our best guess at this time. That will and can be revised once we formalize an agreement with the city.
Thank you.
So the city will be paying 50%. I'm assuming until the contracts are signed and we're meeting that when we talk to them, I mean, they're not putting everything on us on that field, because the original intent was a partnership. So I'm assuming that the costing will be a partnership as well.
Thank you very much, Superintendent.
That's our assumption at this time, yes.
Okay, well, it'd be very interesting to, when we have the contract, that how that comes back to us. But this information is terrific. We've got it in front of us and that. And my last question on the chart, and I think I'm wrong on this one, if you can believe that. The total cost, are we talking over 5 years? The plan and the model refers to over 5 years. So are the total cost on these sheets, is that the best guess over the 5 years that this would be completed, or is this going to be an ongoing cost on the $48 million total?
Executive Superintendent.
Thank you, and through the chair, we are allocating $11 million annually to this strategy. So the assumption is that we will take 5 years to complete everything that is listed here on this chart.
But the 11 million is also not just for playing fields and sports fields, is it? That's for science labs and common area as well, correct?
Correct, and gym floors.
Yeah. So, I mean, 5 years, 11 is 55 million, and we've already got 48 without science labs or.
No. So let's clarify that. Chair of the committee?
I just need that clarified, that's all.
Yeah, so trustees will note that when you look at your Appendix B and flip it over, and the total column, you'll see a total for science labs of 25.3 million, total for learning commons of 5.7. You get the gist, and then you go across to the 48 million. What's interesting to note in the development of that, there is a 15% contingency built within the cost that trustees see before them. But as the note will show at the bottom of the $48 million that's there, that's not $48 million. The intention here is that the $48 million, if there are of the 11 million that's annually allocated to the benchmarks, that it would find itself another home within the multi-year capital strategy.
My last comment would be, this is really well done, and again, we're getting into long-term planning, but if the ministry changes their funding models and we get more money, I'm assuming that we can fast-track the process, and we can always add money to the process. We're not limited, I would assume.
Chair of the committee?
So I would think that getting more money is always a good thing, and yes, we will definitely find a home for it. I think as trustees, we could, that would be.
The reverse also happens. If they take money away from us, that we have to make sure that we have gained.
Correct, and that did become, that's as anything with planning, and especially in a multi-year capital strategy, that was something that was discussed, and no one has a crystal ball on how funding will go. We, as of Friday, a funding announcement that came out from the province, so we have to deal with what we get, but trustees, I think from the committee level and coming forward to the board, I like the presentation of this. I think staff has done a tremendous job in preparing it, and it's a good model, I think, to move forward.
And I have a question on the monitoring item at the appropriate time, through the chair.
Absolutely. So I'll get back to you on that. I'll put you on the list, Trustee Hicks. Any further questions on the secondary facility benchmark strategy, item A? Trustee Danko.
Just one question, since I was at the meeting. I didn't note that Waterdam was slated for an artificial turf field just until tonight. And so was that approved as part of you had the sports field long-term strategy, I guess, with the previous board? Was that approved previously?
Yes.
And just another comment is, I'm pleased to see that we have a long-term plan that we're putting into place if trustees approve this, but also that there's a line in there suggesting that we will monitor this annually, and so it's not going to be a runaway horse.
Thank you very much. Okay, any further questions? Trustee Johnstone.
I'm just curious to know, what is our board's benchmarks for science labs and learning commons?
Thank you. I'll go to the director.
So just to get clarification, Trustee Johnson's question, are you asking what the ministry funds as the benchmark for that? Or, because the decision from the trustees was that we would create science labs, learning commons as a priority learning environment that all kids would access.
Design, is it the design?
Are you asking about the
Okay,
design?
Yes. So what's the design benchmark from a ministry perspective?
Just for clarification, when we look on page 8.2A-4, Appendix A, says the scope of work proposed for each school will adhere to the board design standards. So I was curious what, I'm just curious what will go into all of our learning commons and what will go into all of our science labs.
So thank you for the clarification. The reason I'm looking up there is that there is a photo that's looping in that shows one of our secondary science labs. So last year, we have created a secondary design manual, and in that manual, we now have a template that says what each secondary science room will look like, how many science rooms will get fume hoods. And so I can speak to the visual of that when the visual comes up, but you will see science labs where there's learning pods along the perimeter of a science room where kids have access to Bunsen burners and can work in groups, and then space in the middle. So the learning environment has changed versus just working from the center. And from the learning commons, I would have to defer back to David, but it's something, David Anderson, but we can take it away and provide that. All of those are laid out in our secondary design manual. And when it does come up, I will point to the photo when it loops up, because you'll see an example of that. I don't know if Senior Facility Officer David Anderson has anything on the learning commons in terms of what it is, but we can follow up and provide that information in terms of the design.
Thank you, Dave. Do you have anything to add at this time, or is that something we'd bring back? Thank you, Trustee Johnstone.
I guess I can get more details off record, and I do have at Ancaster High, both those spaces have been renovated. I guess what my question stems from is a few years ago when we were looking at possible designs for the new South, New North School, when we were imagining what those schools would look like, it seemed apparent that we wanted those spaces to be very dynamic, and that we wanted those learning spaces such as the learning commons to be, I guess, interesting spaces with crevices and whatnot. And I wanted to know, I guess where my question's stemming from is that does our design, especially around the learning commons, capture where we had landed on a few years ago in terms of having really dynamic, interesting learning spaces that meet group needs as well as individual study and learning needs?
Mr. Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely it does. It creates learning environments that are not the traditional library or bibliothèque where kids come in and sit and quiet. It provides spaces for kids to work independently, provides spaces for collaborative work. It also integrates technology. So when we think around transforming learning environments, that the Learning Commons is a hub where people engage and gravitate to and collaborate. Again, we can provide some examples of what that would look like in our design manual, but that is the vision as Trustee Johnston has outlined.
Great. Thank you, Trustee Johnston. The question, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate at this time, but as Trustee Johnstone was asking those questions, have we seen the secondary or elementary design manuals this term as trustees? I know it was a discussion, and Trustee Hicks was a big part of that previous term. Have we seen that? Because that might answer a lot of the curiosity.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't believe it's gone to the trustee in finance, in facilities, or in program anywhere, but it's something we can bring back.
And maybe at the appropriate time.
Yep, but definitely.
When we discuss secondary or elementary. Cool. Thank you. Further questions on secondary facility benchmark strategy? See no further questions on that item. Item B, 2016-17 budget development. There is a recommendation moved by Trustee Danko in A and B regarding two transportation questions to Westmount Secondary School. Questions or comments on this item B in the report? Trustee Tobias Murray.
I'm just looking for clarification on why specifically Westmount students are focused on and not the greater scope of all HWDSB students and their access to HSR versus buses, et cetera.
So in terms of the answer, we can go to Trustee Danko, or if staff want to do it from a policy point of view. Trustee Danko, do you want to begin?
The question's arisen because Westmount students just accessing the self-paced programming do not qualify for any transportation if they're outside the walkable boundary of Westmount. And if I'll just speak to that, but there is a point of clarification for part of the motion as well. So it's less about providing access to everyone HSR passes, although I'd love to see that happen, and more about looking at the students who don't currently have access to transportation for that programming because it's not Tier 2 or Tier 3.
Student trustee?
Have we considered other programs, other special programs that students have to travel for that don't necessarily have, where students aren't necessarily in walking distance or have access to regular busing as well?
Yes, so we'll go to the director in terms of eligibility.
Yes. So thank you through the chair. So the new policy implemented this year that was revised, so for specialized programs like our specialized high skills majors and our Tier 3 programs, students now beginning in grade 11 or whenever that program begins are eligible if they choose to go outside to a SHSM in another high school, are now eligible for transportation based on the new policy. And in addition, when we think of students with special needs in our spec ed programs, they also, if parents through a process choose to go to a self-contained class that is not in their home school, transportation is also provided. So I believe that the direction of trustees was to unpack sort of Westmount and sort of learn what would be the cost, since this is this school does not receive transportation at this point, so they've asked us to go away and take those numbers. But according to the other programs, we do provide transportation if they're eligible.
Thank you. And then maybe just for clarity, Mr. Director, what is the distinction between the programs you had mentioned and Westmount? I just think that's the question that Trustee Tobias Murray was asking.
Okay. So thank you for the question. So at Westmount, we talk about programming like every high school. Students can obtain programming in science, English, math. So all the programs to obtain your Ontario Secondary School Diploma are available. The learning style is a self-paced, self-directed, versus a student who says, I do want French immersion, therefore I have to go to either Sherwood or Westdale because I can't take French immersion program in my school. So all the regular core programs are offered at Westmount. It's more of a learning style approach.
Thank you very much. Further questions? Did I have Trustee Deeth first? I'm just checking. Sure. So we'll do that. And I think I had Trustee Deeth first. Did I see your hand, Trustee Deeth? Yes, go ahead. And then we'll go to Trustee Hicks.
So just to clarify, is the self-paced program, is that the only one then that isn't bused when we look at when students have to travel to other schools? I know SHSMs now are covered, FI is covered, IB is covered as well?
Yeah, Mr. Director, I'm just wondering if
so is it the only program that's not covered?
So I still think there needs clarity on that distinction in terms of the criteria and the policy. Mr. Director?
Oh, to answer the question, so when we talk about specialized learning programs, whether they're Tier 3 programs, specialist high skills major, we refer to those as programs that live within schools. Westmount specialized in terms of the learning style, self-paced, self-directed, but in terms of the programs there, if students can obtain all the programs in Westmount as they could in their regular school, but in terms of transportation is not provided to Westmount, that is clear. And in addition, our elementary programs, a few of the specialized learning programs that we still have, because they're not credit granting, our policy only provides transportation to secondary programs that are credit granting. So in elementary, a few of the programs that we might have, like a sports academy, or like a sports academy, for example, there's no transportation provided for those.
Thank you, Trustee Deeth.
Also, because the self-paced program at Westmount comes up from one of the elementary schools, is transportation that's being, no?
So, Mr. Director, I'm just trying to, I'm seeing some confusion around the table. So correct me, because I said as chair of policy at the time, the policy allows for transportation to be provided for a curricular program. So a program that would add a notation on your transcript is required to achieve some credit of some course that's not offered elsewhere. My understanding is at Westmount, the exception of maybe a gifted program or something like that, there is nothing on your transcript or course that you cannot obtain in your home school. It's a style of learning. It's not a program, but that's a curricular program. So that's my understanding. We tend to call it a self-paced program, but it's not a curriculum requirement. So Mr. Director, on that definition and to the policy, can you provide some clarification, especially if I'm mistaken?
That is clear. You've captured it. I mean, I'll ask Peter Joshua to add to it, who has the secondary background, but that is clear in terms of how we use the transportation policy to make those decisions. But just in the notion of the self-paced, self-directed learning style, which people are referring to as the program, but just to delineate that, Peter would provide some insight.
Executive Superintendent Joshua.
So through the chair, and I think I may be repeating what you're saying, but just to explain it in a slightly different way. So the transcript you may receive from Westmount, you would get 30 credits, English, math, tech, whatever courses you're taking. It's the same credits that you're receiving. In the courses that we're talking about through policy, the courses that we're talking about that are specialized learning, there may be additional certifications that you get, for example, IB, that you could only get in certain locations, and that's why the transportation is provided.
Thank you. Trustee Deeth?
I understand the self-paced is a learning style. Are we looking at that in other schools?
So on the books, we have a motion that passed through board to look at a boundary review of the mountain, and in addition, I think it might have been a Part B or 2 that is looking at a review of the self-paced learning style and the offering at Westmount and potentially satellite schools elsewhere throughout the board. And there's a dual approach. One part is going to program committee, the other part is going to finance and facilities. So there will be 2 committees reviewing this in the new school year. Thank you. Further questions to the motion? Trustee Hicks, I had you next.
What the director stated is correct, but the trustees eventually are going to have to deal with the problem because this comes up every year. It's a system program. System meaning students can come anywhere in the city for the program. So what the trustee Danko is trying to establish here is fairness, and we can't get to that point until we get the cost of what it would cost. And I think some of the comments that Trustee Danko stated at the committee that it's not going to be that much money. But it gets down to fairness. And every second or third year, this Westmount transportation comes up. And so we've got to deal with it eventually. I mean, if it's a system program and we believe in the program, and although they can get math at another school in that, but it's how they develop and how they graduate. I mean, they can fast track, they can take double courses and so forth. So to be fair, trustees are going to have to deal with it. I mean, should we supply transportation or shouldn't we? And at the appropriate time, when the costs come back, then we'll have that discussion again.
Thank you very much. Further questions or comments? Trustee Danko, sorry, I don't think you actually had a chance to speak. I think I only asked a question. Go ahead.
It was just a point of clarification on Part B of the motion. This indicates that we would bring back a report providing the cost to provide HSR passes for any secondary student attending Westmount Secondary that would be eligible for HSR passes to their home school. Westmount's not a home school for any student, so can I make an amendment to add that reside outside the walking distance of Westmount? Because the intent is not that if you live next to Westmount and your home school is McNabb, that you would qualify for a bus pass. I just want to make sure that's clear.
And this is the interpretation of the wording currently. I think what it says currently is what you just said. The amendment would suggest there is a walk distance to Westmount. There is no walking distance to Westmount. I mean, currently, I just want to be clear. So when it refers to the home school, that refers to their home school that they would, in catchment, be eligible to attend. So I just need to understand, to accept the amendment or provide clarity, where the mistake is, or where the misinterpretation is.
At the moment, because no student has Westmount as their home school, Part B suggests that I'm asking for the cost to provide HSR passes to basically any student attending Westmount that does not live in a walkable distance of their home school. So that might be McNabb, it might be North Francis Henderson, or somewhere, it might be Waterdown. What I want to clarify is if a student is within the 3.2 kilometers of Westmount, they wouldn't fall under this section.
Oh, I see what you mean. So even if they were living within Westmount, required transportation to Sherwood, McNabb, something like that, that would not transfer over as well. Is that clear to staff, or does that require an amendment? If you are, so in other words, if you're within 3.2 kilometers of Westmount, whether you have a bus pass or not, don't include them. Is that just understood? Is that fair enough? Okay, so I think staff have the clarity, and I think the intention is captured. So that's good. Thanks for the clarity. Any further questions? No? Okay, very good. Next question, Trustee Mulholland.
The motion we passed supported the letter from Blue Water. Will that have any bearing on what we're discussing right now?
Mr. Director?
No, I mean, supporting that, no. To answer to the chair, no, it won't have any bearing on it right now. If the direction the trustees have given is to also write a supporting letter and to support the correspondence. I'd just like to add to that piece is that PCODE, the Public Council of Ontario Directors of Education, have also had discussions around that motion, asking OFSAA in terms of reviewing that, what the intent was behind that motion, and because we were concerned around specialist high skills majors, the impact it would have if a student had to choose between an academic program and to play an athletic team. We thought it was time, so even PCODE had written a letter to OFSAA indicating that we wanted review as well. So to answer the original question, no impact, but I just wanted to add that piece in.
Thank you very much. Trustee Mulholland, thank you. Further questions? Trustee Deeth.
Are we also including the budget 8.2B-1 in this discussion?
Yeah, we are on item B right now, so anything within the budget development item is fair for this time, at this time.
Okay, I just wanted to ask on 8.2B-1, continuing education, do we recover any of those, of that money through fees, or is that over and above?
Thank you. Can you repeat the line again?
Continuing education. Yeah,
Perfect.
under program instruction to continuing education.
Thank you. I'll go to Executive Superintendent. Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair. So for the continuing education expense, there would be a corresponding revenue associated with it that would be partly through fees, but mostly through revenue that we receive from the ministry with regards to enrollment. So in the same way that we receive funding for our secondary students and elementary students, there's also an amount that we receive for our enrollment at in our continuing education courses.
Thank you. Trustee Neath. Okay. Thank you. Further questions to item B? Seeing none, we'll move to item... Oh, I'm sorry. Larry, I didn't see your hand. Or maybe I was mistaken. Larry, Trustee Pattison.
So the 1.5 million is also tied into B. Are we going to talk about that?
My apologies. I wasn't considering. I was kind of considering that another topic. So my apologies. So just I wasn't going to skip over that, but I didn't see that it was a separate item. So on that, anything further on, let's say, Westmount? Let's put it that way. Thank you. Okay. Oh, yes to Westmount. Yes.
I will ask a quick question on Westmount. So I guess the purpose of this is if a lot of students already are eligible for busing to their schools that they would be in catchment, we're going to be able to see black and white what the two costs are for being able to provide transportation to Westmount students, right? That's what we're doing here. Okay.
You got it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on Westmount? Seeing none, we'll move to the other topic, same item, temporary assistance. And we'll begin with Trustee Pattison.
Thank you, Chair White. So I just wanted to know, I mean, obviously we have a plan here, and I don't want to take away from what the work that HR is doing and staff is doing to alleviate this need for this temporary assistance. But my concern is, and what I want to know is, if we go over the amount that we have budgeted for assistance or what have you, where would that money come from? Like right now, we've been needing this 1.5 million, and we've got a new plan. I'm just thinking of other instances where we've stopped something and we either didn't have a plan or we are very in its infancy. All I'm saying is that would it hurt to keep that money there as we're developing this, or what the ramifications are if we need that money for temporary assistance?
So the question is on the budget envelope. So I don't think the money was ever there. It was added from other places. But I'll go to the Superintendent Zucker if she could explain the budget envelopes and what we're funded for and what we're not funded for, and if we go over where that would come from and blah, blah, blah. Superintendent.
Thank you. And through the chair, the budget, for the most part, there are very few envelopes that are related to the budget and how we spend the money. Two of the main ones are we have to spend special education dollars on special education, and we cannot spend more on Board of Admin and Governance than we're funded for. So the rest of the budget, although we budget in very specific lines, it's not necessary. If we go over on one, then we go under on others. The two of them net out, and we don't. It comes out in the wash. So what you're asking is, what have we done in the past when we've gone over a budget? We've been fortunate enough that we have had savings in other line items of the budget in order to cover those costs. We're getting to a point where we've become very lean, and as trustees know around the table, every year when we're going through declining enrollment, we are coming back to finance and facilities and to have to make some difficult decisions with regards to the budget and reductions. And when 88% of your budget is staffing related, you start to have to make some even tougher decisions. So the intention of really putting our mind to reducing this number and to actually coming in within this budget is so that we don't have to make some of those difficult decisions when it comes to either programs or staffing, that we're actually making the reductions, and we can say that the money that we're spending is somewhere of value and supports the priorities of the board.
Thank you very much. We'll go back to Trustee Pattison.
I think that answers the question. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you, Trustee Pattison. Any further questions on temporary assistance? Or, yes, temporary assistance. Trustee Danko.
Just a quick question. One, I appreciate that this is coming back quarterly so that we can monitor it closely because it is an important budget line item. The one question is, do we have any possible reward system that we could consider as part of the temporary assistance program to sort of encourage attendance at work as opposed to just addressing illness at work or illness that prevents someone attending work?
Okay. Superintendent Zucker.
Thank you. And through the chair, we've discussed all options that are available with regards to being able to decrease that cost. And that was something that was thrown around, but at this time, it's not something that staff is recommending.
Thank you. Trustee Danko, good. Thank you. Any further questions? Trustee Mulholland.
Through the chair, the last comment with the replacement to save money, is part of it the plan to have replacement of a particular group after someone is off 5 days, increased to 8 days? Is that what's happening? So let's say the caretaking staff and cleaning staff. If someone is off, they're not replaced now for 5 days. as of with this program, will they now be not replaced for 8 days? So we could have a cleaner off in a particular school and there'll be no replacement for 8 days? Because if that happens, by the time the person comes back, they'll be overwhelmed. Is that the plan?
Thank you. Superintendent Zuger?
Thank you. And through the chair, if I recall, the collective agreement for CUPE is 5 days, so it would still be 5 days, whatever the collective agreement says. And again, we're only doing that in schools that have more than one custodian on staff. If there's only one person there and they are off, we are replacing them right away because, as you say, you need to have some level of support at the schools. So we are following the collective agreement, and that is the intention to continue to do that after 5 days.
Trustee Mulholland?
Appreciate that through the chair. The only problem is, you mentioned one school has 3 cleaners off at once, leaving 1 cleaner. So, I mean, you could say only 1, but there's 3 off at a particular school. It has been for 7 days. Is that the plan?
Executive Superintendent?
Thank you. And through the chair, no, that would not be the plan. We do plan on supporting the schools the way that they should be supported. So I'd be happy to talk offline if you think.
Thank you for the questions. Further questions on temporary assistance and the guiding principles? Seeing none, we'll move lastly to Sir Winston Churchill Plainfield. Anything on that item? Trustee Hicks.
Thank you. Through the chair, Trustee Mulholland and I attended this meeting, and again, the information that the staff brought back were the best information they could get, and there isn't anything specific in motions that they could find that links the Sir Winston Churchill artificial field to the new North School. Trustee Mulholland and I believe that through discussions that was the intent. So we still at this time agree to disagree on it. And it was a full discussion. It was a good discussion. So it says here that Churchill, that the funding would come from the secondary school facility benchmark strategy portion of the multi-year overall capital plan. Taking into consideration now, when the motion it was discussed 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, there wasn't anything discussed with the city of sharing a artificial field with the new North School. So we have a situation still where one of the keys of having an artificial field at Churchill was to share with the new school, which we don't have to do now, but it was the intent when we closed Delta that one of the compromises, and I've already stated this, so I'm repeating myself a little bit, that the field would be an artificial field at Churchill. During that discussion, we, meaning Trustee Mulholland and I, were impressed that the staff were going to look at this, and there's a possibility that there's a report coming back in the near future of when and how the field will be funded. So through the chair, is that correct? Through the executive superintendent. And when will that come?
Executive Superintendent.
Thank you. And through the chair, Thursday at Finance and Facilities, we will be presenting a report on which projects will be completed in the first year of the 2016-17 multi-year capital plan. So the year 1, how the first 11 million is going to be spent, the plan is to bring that forward on Thursday. And yes, you're correct, the intention is to fund Churchill through this component of the multi-year capital strategy.
Thank you, appreciate that very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all the work the staff and the Finance and Facility Committee has done, because sometimes when you agree to disagree and you put everything in place, then it comes out a win-win situation.
Thank you for that. And to your point at the beginning of this item, we should put a footnote to identify which fields are artificial versus natural turf on that chart. And that wouldn't be an amendment, that would just be simple clarification.
And I
Trustee
have
Hicks?
one last very general question that came out of that meeting, and I think it's important that trustees realize that the ministry has changed the guidelines of how we can use the money allocated for a new school. Let's say a new high school is $32.5 million. Before, we had flexibility to add money to that 32.5 million, putting in a better fitness area or a fitness area, wellness center, or OFSAA track, and so forth. And just exactly what the Catholic system has done with the last two schools they built. So I want clarification through the chair to the executive superintendent. Is that the way the ministry is looking at it right now, that we cannot do that?
Thank you very much. Superintendent?
Thank you. And through the chair, yes, in June 2015, the ministry changed the regulations with regards to how we can use proceeds of disposition. And in the past, we were able to use proceeds of disposition to top up our new construction. So we received funding from the ministry at their benchmark costs, and we were able to make the decision in order to top it up to increase the scope of the work beyond the benchmarks, whether it was adding an auditorium or different classes of gymnasiums, or increasing the field, or even increasing the program requirements. We are no longer able to use proceeds of disposition for that purpose. Proceeds of disposition are now required to be used for school renewal-related expenditures, and we would have to get permission from the ministry to use it for any other purpose.
You see, why I raise that, and I think it's important to realize that those two schools were delayed because of some things with the city and with the purchasing the Scott Park site and so forth. So both those schools were on the docket before June 15th. So I really have a very hard time understanding why those two schools wouldn't be grandfathered so that we could use disposition funds for those schools. Because again, we end up as a public school system building two brand new schools that will not compare to the last school, that the Catholic system, in all due respect. So therefore, we end up not being able to have facilities such as, science labs and learning common, and that's all important. So I'm not saying that's not important, but when I say about the athletic areas, here we're going to end up with two brand new schools, and not one of them will be able to host an OFSAA championship because we're not allowed to do the track and the playing fields for that. So I don't know how, through the chair, how you get around that, whether we send letters, whether the director takes a message to the ministry saying, can we be grandfathered for those two schools? Because right now, they probably would have been done as far as the imprint of the school and so forth. So I couldn't let this go by without making those comments. Maybe the director might want to make a comment.
Yeah, and to that, I think it would be important to maybe take it slightly offline, but it is coming back at the next board meeting when we look at the Finance and Facilities report that looks at those two projects. So there'd be an opportunity to even move a motion on moving those items forward for a possible capital priority in the future to apply for the difference in funds, as well as potentially writing a letter to the ministry, et cetera. So at the next board meeting, perhaps staff can look further into that, and then a motion could be appropriate on that topic at that time.
We've already spent money with the architect and the design for the wellness center, which is going to be beautiful for the South School, and the design for the track and the field and so forth. So I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to that report.
And thank you, Trustee Hicks. Anything, final comments to Churchill Plainfield? Seeing none, those are all of the items. Any final questions or comments? And then we'll go to a vote. Trustee Deeth?
Sorry, could I just ask, in regards to the report coming back in regards to Westmount Transportation, when is that coming back?
My understanding is it will align with the items that are going to Finance and Facilities on Westmount in the fall. One's going to program, one is going to finance. So the fall, is that correct, staff? I'm seeing nods.
Yep.
Yes?
First go to program and then to finance facilities.
Yep. So we'll see something in the fall in one or both of those committees. Thank you. Any further questions before we vote? All right, to the entire report, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Item number 9, the Human Resources Committee report from April 19th. Trustee Deep.
Thank you, Trustee White, and not nearly as long as the finance and facilities. Basically, information came to us. We were provided information on a staff development update by Kristen Roy, and thank her for that. We were given an overview of the programs available to all staff, and there were 9 programs that were discussed, different around leadership. They were Choices to Extraordinary Productivity, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is the Stephen Covey one, Foundation Training in Adaptive Schools, Foundation Training in Adaptive Schools Summer Institute, Foundation Training in Cognitive Coaching, Interview Skills, Leaders Facilitating Learning, Organizational Learning, A System Perspective, and Resume Writing. And then we were given an overview of which staff is eligible for that and a description. And then apart from that, item B, policy review, is Michael Prendergast provided us with an overview of 4 policies: the occupational health and safety, performance appraisal, professional learning, and workplace violence and harassment prevention. And with that, I'll bring forward the report.
Thank you, Trustee Deeth. For those 2 information items, first of all, you're moving to receive the report.
I am.
Thank you, Trustee Deeth. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Hicks, thank you. Any questions on either information item? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is unanimous with Student Trustee Tobias Murray, Trustee Mulholland out of the room, and Trustee Johnstone in the room. It is unanimous. Thank you. Item number 10, Special Education Advisory Committee report from April 27th. And is this Trustee Johnstone bringing this report? Thank you. Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. I'm happy to present the report from April 27th. Trustees will note that we had quite a phenomenal presentation from Superintendent Zucker, and it was very detailed. We spent the vast majority of the meeting discussing the budget, and I think the one line that really came out of that evening was when Stacy said to the committee, show me your budget and I'll show you your board priorities, and that this board prioritizes special education. That was very much felt by the committee, and as I won't go into all of the details that came up because I highlighted most of them during my last committee report. I do want to highlight a couple of things that came out in terms of the committee member updates. One is we will no longer have a representative from Choices at our table. Doug Forrester has been a member of SEAC for many, many years. I think I forget the exact number, but getting close to 10 years. And as there's no more students that attend Choices, Choices felt that it was appropriate to no longer have representation at this table. That said, I very much want to recognize Mr. Forrester's work here tonight. I also wanted to point out that last week was Children's Mental Health Week in addition to Education Week. And so you may have seen that HWDSB on some nights was lit up green, and that's the reason why. And also, I know that I highlighted this during my last committee report, but if you look under Special Education Services, we do have the dates for Special Olympics, and if trustees are able to attend, this is a really important date to come out and show your support for our students, and I hope that I'll see all of your lovely faces there. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnson. You're moving to receive the report.
I am.
Do we have a seconder? Trustee Pattison, thank you. Questions, comments on the report? Trustee Pattison? Or no, that was just seconding, thank you. Any questions on the report? All those in favor to receive? That is unanimous with Trustee Beatty out of the room. Item number 11, Rural Schools Committee Report from April 21st, and we're going to Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. So trustees will note a very detailed report, and I won't go through everything, but I'll highlight some of the I guess, more important or critical parts of the discussion. Trustees will note that we did discuss our governance terms of reference. And one of the items that we have been struggling with on this committee is quorum. And so a huge part of our discussion really did focus on quorum, how many individuals was required to make up quorum each year. You'll note that while we currently have representation from, or while we currently have 13 schools that are identified as being rural schools, the committee did enter a large discussion that the whole idea of which school constitutes as rural and which doesn't can be difficult because you have schools such as in Binbrook with Belmore where part of the population is rural and part of the population is very suburban. So we therefore talked about the idea of having quorum be adjusted to the present number of attendees each term, that members pledge to commit to signing a form to attend at least 2 meetings a year. We also had a big discussion around better promoting our council and its work, around school councils encouraging members to participate in rural schools meetings, having principals share minutes with school councils, as well as rotating the location of rural schools so that we can get a better, I guess, more exposure to other rural schools across the system. And we also reconfirmed that we like the current structure where we have either have a trustee present the report here at board meetings. We also, I guess aside from the governance, we talked about a facilities update, which trustees can read, and a new business. While the discussion began on generators, it quickly spread into many other items, including water. I do want to note that the discussion around water issues being experienced at Spencer Valley, just because this isn't necessarily captured in the minutes, but that water issue is related directly to the water table. And and it's also important to note that the superintendent was going to investigate further supports to assist the Spencer Valley with the water issues, but it's not something that we can necessarily control, depending on where you are in the water table. Mount Hope being the highest point in the region, tends to have very few water issues as opposed to those at the bottom of the water table. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and to the chair moving this report.
Thank you very much, Trustee Johnstone. You're moving to receive. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Van Geffen, thank you. Questions or comments to the report? Trustee Van Geffen.
Thank you. Through the chair, with regards to the portion of this, which was the questions from governance, from the governance committee, how does this work then in terms of these questions going back to the governance committee, Mr. Chair?
So these answers automatically go back. So the request came through governance to board, and the responses will automatically go back to the governance committee from all of the current 3 community advisory committees.
Thank you. One second piece, and I think it was just a typo going through. Trustees will note that in the facility update, there is a question there, or there is a point there, the first point in relation to the Beverly Seton project. Some of you may have heard me speak to a OMB appeal that is against the new build there. It states that this will not inhibit the completion of the project. The OMB appeal could, in fact, inhibit the completion of the project, so it's important that the trustees are aware and the public's aware of that as well.
Thank you very much. Trustee Deeth.
Just a comment, really, and it was something that Trustee Johnston, when you're talking about rural school issues, a lot of our school, even when you're talking busing, I mean, you know, schools like Waterdown that are in, you know, urban, I guess that you'd call it, but it draws a lot from rural. It seems to be, it's no longer where a rural school is all rural community. There's so much crossover. So, you know, whether it's the relevance of some of this stuff is changing, and maybe that's, you know, with the committee, the rural schools, because and as Trustee Van Geffen said too, some of it's directly to those schools issues such as table or water tables or things like that too, is just interesting the way that it's changed. I think probably when rural schools came about, I imagine it was rural schools serving rural communities, and that's really changed now as cities grow up around them, right?
Thank you for the feedback. Any further discussion to the report? Trustee Danko?
Just one question about the question around quorum. It just mentions that if there's fewer than 7 members, the quorum can be adjusted to the present number of attendees. Does that mean you could have 2 members? Is there a lower threshold for number of members that need to be present to make decisions or provide feedback to the board?
Trustee Johnson?
I think that where the discussion really landed was that we tend to get, we tend to have around 3 to 4 school representatives. There's usually principals there, but not necessarily representatives from, say, school council, so parent representatives. So we wanted it to be flexible, that if we had 4 people sign on each year, then that would, similar to how school council works, which is often the case with many of our rural school councils. We have very small school councils, but they do a tremendous amount of work. So we wanted to recognize that if not all communities or parents were able to participate, that we were looking for those who did want to participate, similar to how school council is structured.
Thank you. Trustee Danko? Thank you. Any further questions or comments to the report? Seeing none, the motion is to receive. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Item number 12, naming of the track at Sir Allan McNabb. And this is a report from staff, so I'll begin with the director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're proud to bring this report forward. Naming of the Sir Allan McNabb track. It's an action, and it's a recommended action in front of you there. I will pass it on over to Superintendent Romano, who's been supporting and facilitating and leading this work. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair. On Thursday, April 21st, Trustee Hicks and I co-chaired the advisory committee to consider a name for the new track located at Sir Allan McNabb Secondary School. The submissions gathered during consultation were reviewed by the advisory committee according to the guiding principles as outlined in board policy. The committee itself included parents, staff, and students from Sir Allan McNabb, as well as some community members. The following 3 names are the recommendations by the advisory committee. It is important to note that these names are unranked and are in alphabetical order. Mark Anthony Graham Memorial Track. Submission number 2, Mark Graham Track. And submission number 3, Paul Brown Track. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the report. So I'll turn to trustees. I just have a governance or point of order question on the policy, but I'll start with Trustee Hicks. Just in terms of the 3 names, and aside from 1 name. Trustee Hicks?
I want to make comment on the process. It's called co-chairing it.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. So I'll ask my question first,
Okay.
just to clarify the item. To the superintendent, there's 3 names being suggested. I believe when we're naming a school in part, only 1 needs to be provided to the board. So is this just a misalignment to the naming a school requirement of 3 names, or did the committee feel they wanted to add 2 more to the list? I just wanted a bit of clarity on the 3 names versus the 1 that was suggested originally in this boardroom. Superintendent, through the director.
So the policy does indicate whether it's naming of the school or a part of a school, that the advisory committee's job is to submit 3 names.
Okay. I beg to differ, but that's fine. And perhaps I should have raised this offline, so my apologies. So maybe I'll reframe the question, and we do have 3 valuable names, and obviously that work was done, so that's appreciated. Did the committee feel the need to add 2 more names? I mean, they're unranked, they didn't rank them, they're alphabetical. But just in terms of the feedback from the committee, did the conversation center around one, or was it all 3 kind of were on the table to the superintendent?
According to the data that we received in the consultation, it really centered around the 2 names, Mark Graham and Paul Brown. Any other submissions were statistically not relevant, and the discussions certainly were geared around those 2 names.
Okay, that's helpful. I appreciate that answer. So with that, Trustee Hicks.
Well, let me clarify some of the answers. And when the committee met, it was the direction, as the superintendent has stated, that we submit 3 names. Once we met, these are the 3 examples or names that came forward, and there was a straw vote, and it wasn't ranked, as we said, of, first, second, or third. However, when we got into the process, it was very interesting because the motion says to name a track, and when you talk about track, you also talk about field, but the word field was never involved in that. What has happened in the process, and I think it's extremely important to understand that the 2 names here identify 2 different areas where these gentlemen excelled, such as Mark Graham. He was a track person, but Paul Brown was an assistant football coach who passed away very early, and the community and the school and the students, very, very strong feelings for Mr. Brown. So after the process was finished, and because we followed the process, there was informal discussions between people, not in a committee form, saying that the ideal situation would be that the actual track be named after Mark Graham and the field after Paul Brown. I mean, that's where the informal discussion. So through the chair, what I would like to do and get the trustees' opinion on this is make the motion that we name the track, the Mark Graham track, and the field, the Paul Brown field.
Okay, thank you for that, Trustee Hicks. So just for clarity, can you just reiterate those 2 motions, or that one motion? Let's do it as one.
One motion would be that the actual track be named the Mark Graham track, and the field would be the Paul Brown field. So that's all encompassing.
Okay,
So
that's...
And if you know the history of these 2 gentlemen, it's a perfect fit.
So just clarity, and just to make sure that your words are intentional. So the track, as it reads on our page, it's Mark Anthony Graham Memorial Track. Do you want all of those words, or do you prefer just Mark Graham? Sorry, so I just... Sorry. So just to clarify which one you're saying, because there is a difference in words.
Mark Graham track.
Mark Graham track, got it? And Paul Brown field.
Right.
Thank you. Trustee Hicks is moving that item as one. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Mulholland? Very good. Great. Wonderful. So the motion is on the floor for those 2 names, for the 2 components of the field and track. Questions or comments? I think Trustee Danko.
I suppose when we made the motion and approved the motion in March to name the track, I always do associate track with a field. So I think this is a fitting way to respect the wishes of the community and to capture names that are meaningful to both pieces of the track and the field.
Wonderful. It was a great coincidence. With that, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, and thank you, Trustee Hicks.
Thank you.
At this time, the motion item 13 is resolution to committee of the whole private session as per Education Act 2072B. Do we have a motion? Moved by Trustee Danko, seconded by Trustee Johnstone. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. So we'll move momentarily to the side room, and we will be back in public session momentarily. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. We are now back in public session, looking at item 15A, Committee of the Whole Private Report from just a moment ago. I will kindly ask our Vice Chair to read the verbal report. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to bring forward the report of private session of the Committee of the Whole held earlier this evening. That the Finance and Facilities Committee report from April 28, 2016 be approved, including entering into Phase 1 of the property disposition process for Mountain Secondary School, but not before June 30th, 2016, and that revenue received from the leasing of parking spaces around Tim Hortons Field be provided to the HWDSB Foundation for the 2016-2017 fiscal year, and that the Human Resources Committee report from April 19th, 2016 be received.
Thank you, Trustee Beatty. You're moving the verbal report.
I am.
Do we have a seconder? Trustee Danko, thank you. All those in favor of the report? And that is, do we have everyone? No? Okay, those in favor are Trustee Danko, Hicks, Johnstone, Mulholland, Beatty, White, Deeth, Van Geffen. Those opposed? Trustee Pattison, Bingham. Thank you. And Student Trustee Tobias Murray wasn't part of the discussion, so that's not an abstention or a negative vote. That's a vote. Okay, thank you, trustees. Item number 16 is Pupil Accommodation Review Q&A, East Hamilton City 2 and Lower Stony Creek. And I'll begin with the director.
Thank you. So as a follow-up to last week's board meeting where we provided the staff report, final report on the pupil accommodation review for the two identified areas, we have the follow-up questions today, and they're in a presentation format as well. So I'm going to ask Senior Facilities Officer Dave Anderson and Ellen Warling, Manager Accommodation Planning, to walk us through the responses to the questions that were asked last week.
Thank you, and through the chair, so trustees see before them the follow-up questions. These are staff responses to the questions raised May 2nd board. So we'll go through these, and we, through you, Mr. Chair, we can either stop at every question and open it up to other questions, or we continue and take new questions.
Well, what I'm suggesting, we'll look to the two trustees, but I imagine if you could present the answers from previous session briefly, and then we'll see if there's any questions to those for clarification, and then we'll go to new questions following.
Thank you. Okay, so the first item that we're going to discuss just quickly is the Long-Term Facilities Master Plan Guiding Principles. We had some discussions last week around the information that was presented to the Accommodation Review Committees, and what we do identify here are the 9 guiding principles. I will just highlight the number 2, which talks about the utilization rates of school facilities in the range of 90 to 110%. And then moving on to number 9, which talks about the elementary principles, where we can see the school capacities being between 500 and 600 pupil places, the K-8 configuration, school size on a site that's approximately 6 acres, and French immersion in dual tracks with a balance program.
Okay, as we move into the questions around the Stony Creek accommodation review, the first question was around whether the province has ever funded 3 new schools in one area, and what does a multi-year plan submission to the Ministry of Education look like? So we asked the ministry, and at this point in time, they've never had a submission from a school board for multiple new schools. But you have to remember that the school consolidation capital is a new program. They've approved year 1 funding, and they're just in the process of finalizing year 2 funding, and it's a 4-year submission process. We're anticipating that we will have 4 business cases that we'll be submitting through the capital priority submissions that will be due in early July, and then the school consolidation capital funding project in early 2017 is our anticipated date when the ministry will put that out. Question 2 were how were the occupancy numbers determined?
I just want to clarify, so are trustees comfortable with holding their questions until the end of the presentation? I just want to see, do trustees want to ask questions following the answer? Okay, I'm going to suggest holding the questions, so I'm not seeing any negative reaction, a couple nods. Okay, so we'll hold the questions, so staff would like to continue.
Okay, thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So the next question was, how were the occupancy numbers determined for new builds? So we looked at the sizes of the schools, determined by the enrollment projections, the programming, and the space needs. In Lower Stony Creek, it's a mature neighborhood with minimal new housing construction. And we were attempting to create elementary schools in the enrollment of 500 to 600 students. Question 3, if the Ministry of Education provides funding for the new builds, what is the cost to implement construction? What is the cost of implementation for the short-term accommodations? We know that in Lower Stony Creek that we could be using 4 of the existing schools. We'd be short approximately 195 pupil places or approximately 9 portables. The estimated average cost of putting a portable on site is approximately $40,000. And of course, transition planning and the total cost would be dependent upon the approval of the business cases through the ministry and the ability to make use of existing spaces that we have. Next. Question 4, if 3 new schools were built over time, which schools would be first, second, and third, and what would the timelines look like? We wouldn't be making those decisions. When we submit our business cases, the Ministry of Education often determines which schools and business cases they'll fund first, so we don't have control to much extent on that. And of course, as those cases are approved, we would be looking for additional public input to talk about the schedules, the boundaries, and the transition planning. It was very clear through the public meetings that the public certainly wants to be involved with developing those transition plans for students and what would the accommodation plans look like. And of course, we would continue to reapply for funding for any of the remaining schools that we've not yet received. Question 5, what is Dave's?
Thank you very much. So we talked about what governs the HWDSB design for new elementary schools. So it's a 3-step process, essentially. First, we would strive to be aligned with the guiding principles of a school within 500 to 600 pupil places. We would next take the ministry space template, which would determine the size of our classrooms, our gymnasiums, et cetera, the number of classrooms. And then lastly, we would use the design manual that is in process for elementary schools to create the school design. So that essentially transforms into what are the adjacencies, what do the rooms look like and feel like. So next we move into...
So maybe actually this might be a bit of a natural pause. So I'll ask trustees, are there any questions to this point before we go to East Hamilton? Are there any questions for clarification? Keeping in mind, if you have new questions, we'll have an opportunity after the presentations. I'll begin with Trustee Hicks.
Through the chair, how does the Accommodation Review Committee handle when there's a very small chance of 3 new schools being built? So in other words, I understand it's the ministry will say, you know, from the business cases, you can build this school. How do you have Plan B put into place Do you get back to the Accommodation Review Committee at that time, or once we pass the Accommodation Committee's recommendation, then it's up to us to put in order of the schools? In other words, we can change the recommendation because of the funding? That was my whole point of this question. Because the one, it's predicated on 3 new schools.
Mr. Director?
I'll pass over to Executive Superintendent to answer that question, but just before I do, whatever decision is made, then staff will take the direction to endeavor to get the funding for those 3 schools. But just Trustee Hicks' question, what if that doesn't happen, is what I think what he's if that's the motion on, or the direction, then what's next, I think is what you're asking.
Thank you, and through the chair, yeah, it would be the Accommodation Review Committee that makes the determination, and then we would take those recommendations, and as they pass by the board, their job is done. So we would take your recommendations, and there is no plan B, and we've learned, I think, the hard way that it's good not to have a plan B sometimes. And we would submit business case, and if the past is an indication of the future, we'll be asked to submit 8 business cases ranked. We do the ranking, and then the ministry takes that into account, but actually makes the determination of their funding. And then whatever they don't fund, we would resubmit again. And I would say it's very rare that over a time period, what the recommendations that have been in place, that would not happen. I'm not going to say they're all going to happen at the same time, but we would work towards it being implemented, and basically wouldn't stop applying for funding or stop looking at alternate ways to implement this process until it is complete.
So it's the timelines that will vary depending on the ministry. In other words, if it was the intent of the Accommodation Review Committee to build 3 new schools over a period of 3 or 4 years, that might not happen, might be extended over 5 or 6 or 7 years. Is that right?
Mr. Director? And it's not just the review committee, that's staff's recommendation as well. So it mirrors each other, I believe. But
Yeah.
Mr. Director?
Just for that's correct, clarification. That's why last week I indicated not committing to a date, but committing to a time period when all approvals are in place. And that's why that clarification was made last week.
Thank you very much. Okay, questions of clarification to any answers that have been provided so far. Trustee Pattison.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. So we're saying that it's best to submit one plan by the committee. And that if that doesn't get agreed upon by the ministry, then they're going to come back and ask us for, I think he said 8 or 20 or something. He said ways that we could deal with this. So I guess what I'm saying is that if the committee says, here's one plan, this is what we want, and the ministry says no, then that means that you guys get to determine what the options are. I just wanted to clarify what that means there.
Thank you. Mr. Director?
Just clarification. When the trustees make a decision on the best option that they want, the one option, we take that option and put the best business plan in place to access the grants that are available. So as Executive Superintendent Zucker was saying, if we're not successful in obtaining all 3 at once, and maybe we are successful in obtaining 1, then we would go back and look at what other grants are available and where can we submit again. Not unlike when we obtained funding for the new North School, but we weren't successful for the Nora Henderson. We did go back the previous year looking at, I believe under capital priority submissions, we were successful with that grant. So we would not be changing the direction once approved by the trustees.
Thank you. Trustee Pattison?
That's great. Thank you, Director.
Trustee Danko?
Thank you. I think my first question might line up with that, but I was busy flipping through the 200 pages that we have to find something. So the first question is, if we have submissions going in next year for this accommodation review, we know that we will have another accommodation review next year and another one the year after, and presumably each of those will have some kind of capital priority that will go forward. So my question was, how many times would we submit a plan for this particular accommodation review before we would give up and put others ahead of that in terms of priority?
Mr. Director?
So just to clear, Senior Facilities Officer David Anderson was leaning over. At the committee, the discussion of applications and I think risks or whatnot was discussed over and over again. But in terms of this, we would continue to pursue it, and then the question will become what other, if trustees are committed to this motion, then what other revenue sources potentially are available if we're not successful in obtaining whatever grants, then that would have to come back to Finance Facilities for updates in terms of our implementation. So we'll be monitoring it, giving you monitoring updates, and then that would be up to the trustees then to provide any other direction or not. But our commitment is to give you monitoring of where we're at in the status of this, and after a certain period, that would be then in the purview of trustees to then provide a different direction or not.
Thank you. And keeping in mind, capital priorities are ranked, and that is through board motion. So we would have the opportunity to manage on a yearly or however frequent the grants are, the priority sequence. Trustee Danko?
Given some of the delays we've experienced, I think having some flexibility is a good thing. I just hope that the community is going to be very clear on what the potential outcomes are. If one school gets selected by the ministry as a new build and then nothing else gets approved over the next 3 years, and then we resort to meeting their high and urgent needs and possibly an addition if necessary, I just hope that that's going to be clear to the community. And I think our communication is going to be very, very important so that 3 years down the road, we're not in a position to be letting people down. The other question related to determining the occupancies and not having portables. So I appreciate staff's response, as it's a mature neighborhood, minimal new housing, which means we wouldn't expect an influx of students. So I suppose if I just clarified my question, when I look at the trends in enrollment, we're looking at 2019 is for new collegiate 102%, and then we see a very slow but a slightly steady decline. So I suppose, are we expecting this to be a stable enrollment that's going to be sustained long-term? Or in most mature neighborhoods, as families stay and the kids grow up and go out of school, we do tend to have a bit of a decline. We have sort of ups and downs. I was expecting our target enrollment to be closer to 110%. And so if that meant a portable as needed, I was expecting that to be maybe more financially responsible for the system. I didn't ask the question exactly.
Seems like it is a clarification question. It seems like an Ellen question for some reason. I just feel it. Ellen?
So through you, Mr. Chair, as we have examined the enrollment projections, both ours and our EDC bylaw, we see a very stable population in the lower Stony Creek. And for that reason, we have recommended that we would build to the enrollment that we expect. Rather than, we're not expecting fluctuations in that enrollment, and so therefore we've built to the capacity to match the enrollment that we anticipate for the next many, many years to come in Lower Stony Creek.
Thank you. Trustee Danko? Thank you. I have no further... I have Ray, and we'll start with Trustee Mulholland and then Trustee Van Geffen.
Through the chair to Trustee Hicks. See if I understand your question. Was your question, can the trustees change the decision before it goes to the officials, or this goes to the officials and then to the trustees? When was your question? Can the trustees change the decision after it's presented by the officials or before? I mean, the process is that the report goes to the officials. Am I right?
So yes, in June, trustees will make a decision.
And you present the report that's been, and then the trustees approve it. At what time do the trustees change that decision? Before you get it or after?
Mr.
So just speaking of process, so last week we provided the staff's final decision. You are now asking questions and seeking clarification. Delegations will come. June 13th, if I'm not, June 6th? June 6th is the board meeting where trustees have to then make a final decision. We've put our recommendations, Then once you make the final decisions, you've asked us to go away, then begin the implementation. But right now, we're at the stage where we've given, we're taking the advice from the advisory committees. We've given a revised report in one case, and one has stayed the same from our initial report. Now it's in the purview of trustees to discuss, analyze, seek clarification, and then make a decision on June 6th. Once that decision is made, then we begin to implement and start to develop our business case.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Trustee Mulholland? Thank you. Trustee Van Geffen?
I just want to pursue the line of questioning in regards to the two funding sources and the limits, so the number of business cases for submissions. Correct me if I'm wrong, the capital consolidation funding submissions, there is a limit of 8 business cases to which can be submitted for that grant. Is that correct?
8 or 10? Is it 8? Looks like 8.
Correct.
A high number.
Okay, and for so for the capital priorities, is it the same, or is there not a limit?
Usually the same.
Once again, it's 8, but we do rank them, and trustees get a chance to prioritize that ranking.
So with the capital consolidation funding, that grant, we will be entering this year. We decided on not, we were in the decision of not putting a business case, and in the end, we put Sherwood on. It will be entering its third of its 4th year. So in this discussion about limits, we're not going to reach that threshold through the accommodation reviews with that grant, unless of course they extend.
This is where I politely cut you off. Just to remind folks, and I know this is always an awkward or delicate balance between expressing our opinions in debate in and among these clarification questions and seeking actual answers to these questions. So traditionally, or I guess the proper process would be just to ask clarification questions for your own knowledge, and then come prepared on June 6th to express all of your many, many opinions.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So with that, I guess my question would be, when the capital consolidation funding grant ends, and I guess this is a speculation question because it speaks to the limits, but where will we see, would it be an increase, I guess, in the capital priorities grant in terms of the submissions, or is there any kind of historical in the past of how these grants have worked out? Or I'm just curious of the input from staff on how they see that progressing when the consolidation grant ends, and we are then down to a program where we only have the ability, the capital priorities grant, to have 8 to 10 submissions.
Thank you very much. So to staff, Mr. Director.
Yes. Through you, Mr. Chair, we cannot speculate, but we can historically, when one grant time period has expired with the ministry, there tends to be other grant opportunities that emerge. So prior to school consolidation grant, my team can correct me, we had Good Places to Learn grant. We also had Prohibited to Repair grant, and there was another one I can't recall, but typically once a grant does expire, ministry in the past has provided other grant opportunities. School capital priority submission has been a consistent one, looking around the table to my team. So that one has been a consistent one, and there's 2 more years left in the school consolidation grant.
Thank you. Trustee Van Geffen.
Has this board ever submitted a business plan that involved 2 builds on a plan, whether through capital priorities or the consolidation funding?
Yes. Thank you. Further questions, clarification? Trustee Beatty, I had you next, or last.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify. The capital submissions were allowed 8 business cases to be put forward. The Stony Creek plan with the 3 schools is 1 business case, correct? Or is it being submitted as 3? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Beatty. Any final questions? We'll turn it back over to Dave and Ellen. East
Great.
Hamilton.
East
City 2.
Hamilton.
Go.
Thank you. So the question we saw here before us was, why isn't Sir Wilfrid Laurier and Lake Avenue listed as fully accessible in the staff recommendation? On page 423 of the May 2nd board report, it should have indicated yes for both Lake and Laurier in the accessibility column. Enhancements will occur if this is the preferred option that proceeds, and additional work will be required over time. Next question were the costs associated with the accessibility in the feasibility report. So typically we're looking at path of travel for accessibility. We're looking at designated parking spaces, main entrance access, barrier-free that meets the current OBC, Ontario Building Code, all levels accessible by a wheelchair, classrooms and common spaces accessible by a wheelchair, elevators, lifts, that sort of thing, and a washroom accessible by wheelchair, and a barrier-free universal washroom as well. So those totaled about $475,000.
Thank you. And question 8, if trustees wish to change a boundary between accommodation review areas, what is the process to do that? The answer is a post-accommodation review, boundary review for the elementary and the secondary boundaries. So one of the pieces of geography that was in question is the piece up on the map there. It's a small area just to the south of Lake Avenue. The next map illustrates the piece we're talking about is the light blue are some houses and townhouses in the community, and the yellow, the pink are the condominiums or apartment buildings. The apartment buildings would be continue to be directed into the Lower Stony Creek accommodation review, and there's been conversation around sending the blue pocket, the 30 students that live in those homes to Lake Avenue because they can walk to the school. Question 9, where are these students coming from? And I believe this is talking about the French immersion. When I look at the numbers here, we talk about the French immersion having 124 students west of Red Hill Parkway. There are 101 students in the East Hamilton City 2 area that are taking French immersion. There are 50 students in Lower Stony Creek that are taking French immersion, and 8 from the Winona area that are taking French immersion at the 2 Glen Bray, Glen Echo sites together. The map illustrates the green dots are the locations of the students. Always remember that a green dot may represent more than one student. What percentage of French immersion students make up the enrollment figures for Glen Bray and Glen Echo? At Glen Bray in the middle school, it's 50-50 split between the English and the French students. At Glen Echo, we have about a 60-40 split, 60% being in English and 40% being in French. The next question was asking about the future development that's possible in the 2 review areas. So I'll start with pockets 1, 2, and 3 that are currently in the Sir Wilfrid Laurier boundary, and the Sir Isaac Brock boundary. Those 3 pockets together are illustrated in the box at the bottom of the map. It shows that there are approximately 509 housing units. 334 are townhouses, 75 singles and 75 semis and 99 single family homes. And the yield from those 3 pockets are expected to be about 143 students over time as those homes are occupied. The pocket at the very top along the shore of Lake Ontario is about 960, mostly apartments. And we expect, based on the type of housing unit, approximately 50 students would be yielded from those. All of those students, those 200 students, are fully accounted for and projected for in our enrollment projections in the next 10 to 15 years. Thank you. So now I'll go over some of the general questions that were asked.
Yep.
Oh,
Let's
you
see
want
if
to
there's
pause?
any East Hamilton questions quickly. Any East Hamilton questions? Thanks, Ellen. Did a great job then. General questions, or general answers, rather. Dave.
Great, thank you. So we were asked to provide some of the areas for the various capacities in different schools. We talked about gymnasiums and playfields. So I'll walk you through some of the areas in terms of what benchmark is funded and what areas are allocated. So you can see down the left-hand side, we've got the areas. So probably the most of importance here for discussion, we see the change in classroom, but the sizes all stay the same. When we go from a 450 pupil place to a 500 or 550 pupil place, we can see the increase in the gymnasium and stage area, and a slight increase in the general office area. But I think and the library as well, thank you. But I think it was the gym and the stage that we were really focusing on for the purposes of the discussion last week. So we looked at the Lower Stony Creek gym and stage space. You can see the schools down the side, the existing square footage in roughly the middle of the page, and then our deficit would be the percentage on the far right. So if those schools were all built today by current ministry benchmarks, that is the area that we would be requiring, and then you can see the over-under as a result. Next slide identifies the play area size of both asphalt and grass area, which is also something that was asked to be brought back. And then I'll move on to East Hamilton 2, same exercise for the gymnasium and stage space. So we can see the square footage in the existing schools, the benchmark square footage, and then the deficit down the right-hand side. Next slide, please. The next slide, we see the gym and stage space of the recommended option. And so the projected OTG, as well as the existing gym and stage space in the school right now, the benchmark, and then the deficit percentage identified. And those, both of those increases would likely be addressed in a future addition and/or renovation. And again, similar exercise for the outdoor play space. Okay, so we're looking at clarifying the funding sources for the options brought forward. More specifically, will renovations to schools, not specifically for the new builds, and the use of proceeds of disposition. So what we did in the next slide, if I could, thank you very much. You're one step ahead of me. We would provide our business case submissions, and the additions or new builds would again fall under the SCC funding or the capital priorities submissions. Maintenance, accessibility, or renewal work would fall under the SRG, school condition improvements grants, or proceeds of disposition aligned to the ministry spending. We talked a little bit about timelines last week in terms of the process required. Some of these things are often outside of our control in terms of the regulatory approvals. Issues can arise, such as OMB appeals that would essentially jeopardize any of the dates, but we are suggesting 2019, but again, everything has a giant asterisk beside it because we don't have control on a number of those components.
Okay, and we were asked to provide a review of the list of additional pieces of information that the trustees asked for when we presented the accommodation reviews on December 7th. So I'll quickly walk you through each of these. We did do the edits that were asked for. We provided additional supplementary information, such as student distribution and walkability maps, transportation costs. We were asked for what were the list of what would be upcoming in the future reports. Through all of our meetings, we talked with the committee and the public about the various reports that were required and the process we would follow. A land swap concept, when we were looking at potential new sites, did not materialize. The separate numbers for busing and transportation and French immersion were provided. I think you've seen some of those tonight. Student voice, including engagement of elementary students, is the one piece we didn't get to. We talked about boundary issues. We saw some of those again tonight. We've also talked about benchmark information. The community membership in the advisory committee structure, we were successful at finding a community member for the East Hamilton accommodation review, but not for the Lower Stony Creek. We did present and provide information on the old and the new policy in our general information session for our advisory committees. We, through all of our public meetings and our board website, along with the email site that we have, provided feedback to answer concerns from ward constituents. French immersion boundary issues and options were made available. The chart for each school showing options was made available, and everything that we shared with our committee members was posted on the website. Question 16 is a question that was submitted after the meeting last week. So I'm going to walk you through. It's a combined accommodation review area scenario. It's a series of slides, so bear with me as I walk you through an accommodation scenario that has been brought forward by a trustee. So the new scenario suggests that we build 4 new elementary schools, one on the collegiate site, the Eastdale, Memorial, Stony Creek, and one on the Glen campus. The school sites listed here are slightly different than what was in the staff recommendations, and you'll understand why as we go through. In all of these accommodation reviews suggested, keeping these 4 schools will mean that we will have boundary changes for every single school. So when you look on the map that's there, the colored pieces of geography are the existing boundaries. The thick black lines represent the proposed boundaries that would be in this accommodation review option. The green are the 4 new sites, the one at Glenbrae, Collegiate, Eastdale, and Memorial. The 2 schools that will remain in our inventory are Sir Wilfrid Laurier and Lake Avenue. The projected enrollments are up here. We have a capacity that we're recommending of just under 3,400 pupil places and a projection by 2025 of 33 students, and that represents a 98% utilization. Some notes from this combined scenario. In this scenario, French immersion is removed from the Glenbrae and Glen Echo sites, and it is directed into schools in East Hamilton. Our initial analysis, while not yet complete, indicates that W.H. Ballard is a potential French immersion site. In addition, French immersion program would be opened at Memorial Stony Creek site, which accommodates students from the lower Stony Creek area for French immersion. Other notes around this scenario: it would eliminate approximately 1,000 pupil places, eliminates approximately $43.5 million in renewal needs, and has an estimated capital request for the 4 new schools of $41.6 million. That's it.
Thank you very much. So, any final questions for clarification on the general questions? Trustee Danko.
Maybe just for clarity, the Glen campus, when I looked at the size of that campus, appeared to be fairly small in terms of acres. Can we just clarify how many acres that site is versus Sir Isaac Brock?
Does staff have the acreage of Glenbrae, Glen Echo, and Glendale?
Just give us a second. For the next question, we have.
But Sir Isaac Brock, we know the answer. That's around 7, I think. 5.6 almost.
We'll have that shortly. If you want to go to another question, once we have it, we'll get it. We have someone, staff there who's looking it up right now.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
I have a
You
feeling.
don't have to make one up.
No, I have a feeling. I'm good at that, though. That the answer to the question is that there's another site in combination with this campus that provides green space beyond the 1.7 acres that we have right now. Is that correct? Maybe that's all the answer I need.
Yeah.
So-
You answered your own question.
Yes, I was going to say through you, Mr. Chair, you've got both the Glenbrae, the Glen Echo, and the Glendale Secondary School combined, along with a city park in that block. So it's multiple acres. We'll wait for Ian to provide the answer, but it's got 3 schools on it right now.
Further question, Trustee Danko? Any further questions on these general answers? Trustee Pattison?
Thank you, Chair White. Just to clarify, I don't have my notes for the East package. Is Sir Wilfrid Laurier already that big?
Yeah, I thought it was around 710, and it says 733. So is there an addition there, or is that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, in the scenario we presented tonight, it's a small increase. Sir Wilfrid Laurier is short 2 resource rooms, and so it would be the addition of 2 resource rooms to increase that enrollment to 733 from the, I believe it's a 709 capacity.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And so the Glen Echo number at 500, that is already assuming that French immersion is not there?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And just in the combined scenario notes, we've already talked about this program where we indicated that we're just going to explore schools in the east area, not necessarily a single school. We've mentioned Ballard in here, but we are looking hopefully at other possibilities and going to report on that. So,
Ellen, do you want to speak to that? I think you'd mentioned that staff wasn't complete.
Correct. So through you, Mr. Chair, we'd like to have the opportunity to take a little more time to look at that French immersion scenario that would move French into East Hamilton to make sure that we've got the analysis correct before we share it with you.
East Hamilton 1, not 2. Sorry.
yes, just be clear, just to clarify that, because now that we're getting into East, now we have to look at some of my schools as well, and you know, we've talked about the whole, how this affects enrollment. So Memorial is naturally the school that AM Cunningham feeds into English. I just hope it's also part of that discussion. That's
Good. Thank you. Any final questions? I have Trustee Hicks.
Thank you for the information on the gymnasium. Just a quick question. The remaining schools, regardless of the option, the least enrollment would be about 450, and I think the maximum would be about 525 or so. And the comment was made that the gym size would be extended in the future. Why wouldn't it be done in the original renovation? In fact, if you have to renovate and push out a wall for classrooms and so forth and so on, why wouldn't you do it in the initial renovation?
So, through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, as a point of clarification, I intended that it would be offered at the same time under the same renovations and expansion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Johnstone?
Just referring back to the very beginning of the general questions around stage and gym space, my understanding was that ministry no longer pays for stages or covers funding for that area. Can you clarify?
Dave?
Certainly. So through you, Mr. Chair, the ministry benchmark space template still identifies gym space and stage space within the space template itself. I can confirm that, though, if you'd like, and bring that back next week in terms of the area identified.
Thank you. We can get further clarification, but it is identified. Not as a standalone auditorium, but as those combined cafeteria mordiums. But but I think that would come back next week, Dave, or is that something that you want to take a
I can
crack at?
clarify it in 2 minutes.
2 minutes? I was going to give you 2 seconds. All right, staff will take that away. And Ellen, we have a number for acreage?
Yes, the combined Glen campus, as we've started to call that in the accommodation review, is 16 acres between the 3 sites.
And then another 5.7 across the street. Excellent. Any further general questions of clarification? Seeing none, we are okay. Are there any new questions? Keeping in mind that questions can be submitted up until the end of the day on Wednesday to Heather. Any new questions on Lower Stony Creek? Any new questions on East Hamilton? Okay, with that, please email any questions. Any new general questions? So keeping in mind that, once again, by the end of the day, Wednesday, any questions submitted to Heather will be answered at the following board meeting. So with that, thank you, everyone. We are now on item number 17, oral reports from liaison committees. We begin with item A, our City School Board Liaison Committee. And I'll look to Trustee Beatty or Trustee Deeth. Would you like me to provide the update, or would you like to take a crack at it? Seeing as you're overwhelmingly voted for me, I think I got to have voted. So on behalf of the 3 trustees on the liaison committee, just want to mention that we had a great meeting last week. It was also attended by student trustee Tobias Murray, so thank you, Hannah, for attending. Your presence was appreciated. Just a couple notes to trustees. We finally finished our terms of reference for our liaison committee. It has been updated after many years of discussion. I want to thank Mayor Eisenberger in particular for his quick and speedy assistance with that. Once he was back, those discussions went very, very quickly and easily. So we finished that, and of course, staff has a liaison committee themselves to discuss property and facility matters. They as well completed their terms of reference. Both of those documents will come back through governance for review and approval. So the board will see those once they come through our governance committee. We also provided the city with an accommodation review update. Trustee Beatty provided an outline of what's happening in East Hamilton as well as Stony Creek. We did receive an update through our director on an initiative that was originally suggested by the mayor, and that was green bin programs through all of our schools. The city made an offer to pick up green bin waste in front of all of our schools. And currently, right now, the director provided us with an update that we are piloting a program at Westmount. That is the first secondary school. The hope and plan is to expand that to all secondary schools and then continue it through elementary programming. There were some delays the director expressed in reference to our collective agreement with our custodial staff, and it doesn't include green bin recycling or at least it's not identified directly. So that's an item that staff will be working through and operationalizing in the next year or two while the pilot program rolls out. So further updates will be brought to our attention and the liaison committee's attention at the appropriate time. The city also provided an update regarding their strategic directions and their process that's underway. And to Trustee Hicks' question a month or two ago around when is the city going to present to us here at the board, the plan is, and right now we are in touch with the city in terms of a presentation date at one of our June meetings. June 6th, the city will be here and they will present on the city budget as well as some information on their strategic direction process. So we'll receive that dual presentation in just a couple of weeks. Also, we received some general capital updates on some joint projects like Greensville, Beverly, Dalewood, et cetera, et cetera. We also passed a motion, and this is an interesting one that I think would be of assistance to all trustees, and that is a request that staff at both the city and school board create an inventory of agreements in reference to property, facilities, and I'm hearing that that list is increasing as staff are looking through the different agreements, and I think it's above 50 or 60 or something now. But just to let trustees know, as we all find out at different times, different agreements that may have been approved in our wards that have either been a long practice but don't necessarily exist in writing. It could be something as minor as, you know, snow clearance on someone's sidewalk between us and the city, to something as large as a community center or school being built on the other's property. So we want to categorize all of those agreements and do an inventory as well on whether there's written agreements that exist, and if they do not, then obviously create them or recreate them, whatever the situation is. So that's the first step. Let's get a list of our inventory, and then let's see what we're dealing with, and then staff, of course, will be operationalizing the fine details to get those items in order. We provided the city with a update on our strategic directions, and it was actually, I think, the day after our tagline event that was hosted by Hannah. So Hannah was there, and she provided a wonderful presentation. And that is it. The only other piece that I would note, and that was, I think, the intent of Hannah's attendance, and that was in the terms of reference. We did follow through with the motion that Trustee Deeth moved on behalf of Hannah a number of months ago, and that is adding a student or 2 student reps to the liaison committee with the city. And that was passed, so 2 students have been added, not as permanent members, or at least students that would serve as permanent members, but a rotating position where each meeting, and if we only have 3 or 4 per school year, that can be different students each time to observe the process of the liaison meeting. It could be a student trustee, it could be someone on student senate, it could be someone within a secondary school that may have maybe taking a course of relevance to an item being discussed at that meeting, but it gives us the opportunity, if we have 3 or 4 meetings per year, an opportunity to provide 6 or 8 students with that experience and opportunity. So Hannah, twisted everyone's arm at the meeting. It was a tough go, but we snuck it in there, and it was passed. So you'll see that once again at the appropriate time when we end up at governance. And Heather is reminding me we have 8 minutes to go. So with that, that is the City School Board Liaison Committee. Any questions? Seeing none. Hamilton Wentworth Home and School Association update. Trustee Pattison.
Thank you, Chair White. So just a couple of items from Home and School. So on May 16th, they have their annual meeting. There are now 2 new Home and School associations. Rosso, it looks like they've been busy up in Trustee Johnstone's area, and Ancaster Senior. I'm showing 19 sites without these 2 on the board website under the Home and School page. I was wondering if maybe we could look at that. I thought there was only 10 existing now, so maybe just to make sure that those sites are all updated on our board website if we could. And then there'll be an OFSAA Leadership Day on June 17th, which will be in Hamilton as well.
Thank you very much, Trustee Pattison. Any questions? Item C, the HWDSB Foundation, Trustee Danko.
Thank you. The next meeting for the foundation is actually this Wednesday, so we haven't met since the last update, but I will remind everyone that there is the HWDSB Golf Classic 2016 on Wednesday, June the 1st at Willow Valley Golf Club in Hamilton.
Thank you, Trustee Danko, and I'm sure we'll be seeing those email invites coming soon, if not already. Next report, OFSAA report, Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. OFSAA met 2 weeks ago. I do not have much to report since my last report from the regional meeting, as our directors meeting mainly confirmed what we'd already passed regionally. However, I do want trustees to know that an email went out, I believe that was today or yesterday, all melds into one, stating that we've had a huge, I guess, win is what we'll call it, under our copyright consortium, where we will not be required to pay certified access copyright tariffs Instead, under our consortium, which all school boards belong to, we're going to jointly develop and implement a system to monitor copyright compliance and enhance education around copyright for teachers, schools, and all different school board employees. The reason why this is important, had this not gone through, this would have been a major expense for school boards. So this success in and of itself vastly pays for our membership fees to OFSAA. This was a huge gain because this would have been a huge expense for school boards. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnstone. Questions? Trustee Pattison?
Yeah, thank you, Chair White. Trustee Johnson, so does that copyright, are we also looking at, when schools want to have like home and schools or parent councils want to have movie nights, that the issue that they face trying to get rights to show the movie, is that included in this rights or is it just educational?
I would have to get clarification, but I expect not, because that's like Disney and whatnot do own the copyright to those movies, and generally you do have to pay.
Okay, yeah, I just know there's been a lot of questions, when associations try to show movies, and I wasn't sure if that copyright was included in there, so thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, the Umbrella Board update. Trustee Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My report is brief. The annual general meeting of the Umbrella Family and Daycare Centers will be this Wednesday at the Scottish Rite at 4:30. They have a keynote speaker that eludes me at the moment, but I can provide it if trustees are interested. If any other questions, I'm happy to answer them at that time.
Thank you. Any questions? Motion to adjourn. Trustee Hicks, seconded by Trustee Mulholland. What? Yeah. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.